I welcome everybody to Talk Back. It's May 18th, 2026, and I have another very interesting guest. We have been commemorating in the last month the Shoah, the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe, the 6 million, and we had a wonderful program at our community center in Waterford at Temple Emmanuel, where our community commemorated and had very important guests. And one of our guests is here today. Her name is Marion Percy, and she's terrific because Marion is a citizen of the world, a woman who normally you would never think of someone who might become an expert on a subject matter, of someone who was very famous during World War II or right before World War II, when Europe was showing all the danger signs and when people in America started to realize we have to do something. And so let me first introduce Marion, and then we'll get into all the background. Hi, Marion. It's good to see you.
I am delighted to be here.
Okay. So I want to say, what is your background? And what impelled you as a person of you don't have a PhD in history, you didn't study it specifically in college, but at some point in your life you said, this is interesting stuff and I really want to sink my teeth into learning about it. Tell us about that.
I had nothing to do on a Sunday, and I saw a lecture advertised. There is a woman from Newtown, Rita Frost, was trying to promote recognition of VARIAN FRY, who she called America's Oscar Schindler. And I had never heard of him, and I love to hear about the unknown stories, the quiet stories, the people in the background. So I went to Rita's lecture, and it was fantastic what she was showing us. There's a documentary called Assignment Rescue, narrated by Meryl Streep, that she showed, and then she had slides and information about what VARIAN FRY had done, who he was. I have a lot in common with VARIAN FRY because he was just interested in helping, but he didn't have any experience. He was a journalist, and he learned more through his journalism assignments about what was happening in Europe in the mid-30s.
Okay, so let's get back to you. So you said America's Oscar Schindler. Well, now we all know through film, through art, that Oscar Schindler was someone who protected Jews through his factory and his work, and he made sure that many Jews were saved, and a wonderful film was done by Steven Spielberg about that. And so when she called VARIAN FRY America's Oscar Schindler, she was saying that he saved a lot of people who were at threat of peril during the Holocaust.
Right.
Many Jews and some non-Jews also. So what grabs your interest in that more than, I don't know, a movie about bees or flowers or gardening, which you might like to do? What really grabbed you that day to say, I got to learn more about this?
One person can make a difference. One person can start the snowball, and good things come of it. The consequences help others. And he's a very good example of that. And she just gave this fascinating interpretation of the experience of being constantly under surveillance, constantly in danger, meeting amazing people. And of course, the artists he saved changed the world of art and actually moved art, the center of the world's art, from Paris to New York because of the people whose visas he acquired.
Okay, so you're getting ahead of it.
Okay.
Let's go back to fascinating lecture. Wow, this is interesting. One person makes a difference. What did you do next? What was your next determination to learn more?
I wrote 15 handwritten letters to all the Connecticut representatives, said this is what I've just learned about, and he was from Connecticut, and I would like to see him recognized. And I also wrote to Rita, and she had said at the end of her lecture, if anybody's interested in helping me. And I thought, this would be great. This would be fun.
What kind of help was she asking for?
Doing the research, contacting people. Her goal was to have a bust of VARIAN made. I was looking to get him nominated, indoctrinated to the Connecticut Hall of Fame. And in the process, she had met some people, but I just got onto my computer and found so many connections of people who were so willing to share their experience and their knowledge of VARIAN FRY. Huge thanks go to his son, Jim, who always helped any researcher and would participate in any program honoring
What
him.
year was this? How long ago was this?
I got involved around 2013.
Okay, so
That's
just
when I
over
saw it.
10,
Yeah.
12 years
Yeah.
that's been happening.
And a couple
more.
of years, I just was constantly not just actively looking for facts about the emergency rescue committee that sent VARIAN to France, but also meeting the people. All of a sudden, I would have a circumstance where someone would come up to me and say, "Oh, I know all about him." For instance, a friend of mine, her son is in the Danish army, and he's an officer, and he was in Afghanistan. And I write to soldiers families whose sons and family are sent deployed.
Yeah.
And so I told her, "Give me his address, I'll write to him." And I had just been learning about VARIAN. And so I told him in my letter, I just learned about this VARIAN FRY, and it's very interesting. And he wrote back and said, "Oh, we learned all about that in school, in Europe."
In Europe, they
Yes,
learned about
and they knew who he was.
Interesting.
So that, of course, and I really believe in the kind of activity, as VARIAN's grandfather was a superintendent of the Children's Aid Society in New York, who sent the orphan trains out west. My father was a teacher and administrator at a school for children from broken homes. And those kids were, it was K through 12, and those kids were my babysitters. My dad worked there for a long time. We lived on the campus. Some of them stayed in close touch after graduating. So there was a similarity there also, as helping people who needed the help.
Right.
That
And then the
connection.
fact that so many, look, I will admit I did not know very much about him at all until this last year happened. And I learned from you and from Professor Pettigrew down at Southern Connecticut State University, which we'll talk about also. So let's go back and talk about a little bit about the context in which this man became famous and maybe why he is becoming famous again, even though for years I think many people in Connecticut were not aware of what he had done, and that he was one of the heroes of World War II during the Holocaust time. Okay, so let's go back. Hitler is conquering Poland, Austria, and then in 1940 he invades France and takes over France, and the southern part of France becomes the Vichy government. America is not at war yet. Franklin Roosevelt is maybe trying to help England with the Lend-Lease program, but the American people are by and large determined not to enter the war. And even though Roosevelt and Eleanor, his wife, are learning about some of the tragedies that are befalling the Jewish people in Germany and the rest of Europe and other places, it's very difficult for him to figure out a way to act. And of course, it's not until December of 1941 and Pearl Harbor when we enter the war. So now we're in this period of 1940 to 41 before we enter the war, where we are considered, I guess, neutral, right? We're not taking sides in what's happening so far between England and Germany and the other European countries. But there are people in America who are looking and saying, oh my God, we got to do something. The government is not doing something. We have to do something. And there is a journalist, a young man named VARIAN FRY. And in 1935, he takes a trip to Berlin. What does he see there?
He was assigned to see what's going on, what the rumors were. He was a journalist for I believe, The Living Age was the name of the paper. And so they sent him to Berlin, and the night he arrived was the beginning of the pogroms against the Jews. And he literally was going to his hotel, and the brown shirts were beating Jews, pulling them out of their cars, smashing windows, assaulting people. He went into a restaurant to get out of the way, to get off the street from all this violence. And there was a man sitting cowering with his hands on the table, and a German soldier came up and stabbed him through the hand to the table and said, "When Jewish blood is spilled, it's a German holiday." And Varian was horrified. He was confronted with it directly. He walked right into it. And so he wrote about this, and he wrote an article called "The Massacre of the Jews," and to explain to the United States and the world, look at what's going on. Open your eyes.
And
Take
this is
your
1935, and this is 3 years before the famous Kristallnacht,
Right.
November 8th,
Right.
9th,
Right.
when the Germans firebombed many synagogues and destroyed them, killed about 1,000 people, smashed stores, and that was written up in the newspaper. This is 3 years even before that.
Much earlier, and he was already in touch in this country with people who were talking about rescuing the Jews. The labor unions were worried about people they knew who were the working people losing their jobs, and they were trying to get help to these people, but some of them had already emigrated themselves and were afraid to go. Also, Varian was a graduate of Harvard, and it turned out that American Ernst Hofstangl was also a Harvard alumni. And when Varian found out he was in Berlin, he made an appointment to see him to find out what was going on. Well, Ernst was a personal friend of Hitler and a director in the Department of Propaganda.
Wow.
Varian was very charming, and he said, you know, he was very friendly to Ernst and said, "Really, what is going on?" And the man told him. Absolutely, and he knew that Varian was a journalist.
What did he tell him?
About the plans for exterminating or extraditing Jews from the country.
And initially, they wanted to get all the Jews to leave.
To
and
leave.
Then
That was
the final solution of death came some years later.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But that was in the plan, was to either have them emigrate to another country or eliminate them. It was either or.
Wow.
And, you know, Varian kept his cool and just tried to get as much information as he could about the feeling, the anti-Semitism of what was happening with Hitler's directors and officers. So he was, and here he is, as the rabbi said in the program, at the holiday program, here's this 32-year-old who comes in and finds all of this out, and who's going to listen to him? Well, he was a respected journalist at the time, very liberal, so there were some political differences. And when he came back, these other individuals who wanted to help, Alfred Barr, the director of MoMA, they wanted to help get the artists out. The Museum of Modern Art wanted to get these people out and knew they were in danger. If they weren't Jewish, they were anti-Nazi.
All right, so you said these people, so let's just talk about the fact that, let's go back. So he came back from Europe with that information, and then he got involved with the Emergency Rescue Committee, whose main thrust was to try and save artists, writers, intellectuals who had been stuck mostly in France, because a lot of people came to Paris where they thought they might have been safer than staying in other parts of Europe, and yet once Hitler invaded and took over, they were in peril in, so talk about coming back and how he got involved with this committee who wanted to save these people in
Well, they were a circle, pretty much a circle of friends and associates with the same idea, who got together and said, we need to join together so that we can help these others. And they decided to raise money and create what they called the Emergency Rescue Committee. They had a big dinner where they earned $3,000 donated, and they worked on a list of who they felt was most in danger.
They had a list of about 250, and that was many Jewish artists on this, like the most famous Mark Chagall,
Max Ernst,
intellectuals like Hannah Arendt, who wrote very important books about the Nazi
poet Hans
world.
Saal, and Jacques Lipschitz was a sculptor.
Sculptor, right.
And they had, and also it was not just, well, they wrote up the list of artists and intellectuals, but that included some who were politically important, some of the labor union leaders and things. But pardon me, it was primarily to get the artists out, and they were all were all in Marseille because that was the only open port. That was the only place that people could leave by the ocean. I'm very sorry. And so they all ran from Paris and came to southern France, which was, I'm very sorry,
That's okay.
pollen. The excursions, everybody left and went to Marseille because most of the refugees were getting out of France from Marseille, either going to Africa, across the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic. So here they've all come together. Now we've got this big dinner, and they're making a plan of how to get these people out. Some of them knew where Alma Mahler and Franz Werfel were. They knew where Marc Chagall was. They knew where Pablo Picasso was, who wouldn't leave. And so they made a plan, and they said, well, just send somebody over there. The State Department knows this. Eleanor Roosevelt has contributed to the list, and nobody would offer to go.
Yes,
Oh, you're my favorite.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. It's pollen season.
Yeah, sure. No one else volunteered to go.
No one else volunteered to go, and finally, Varian said, well, I'll go. I'm not in danger of being
He
incarcerated.
had a family at that point. He was married.
Well, he was married, no kids yet.
Okay, no kids.
And his wife Eileen and he were both very active in these liberal and social programs and helping others. Again, led up to from the time he spent with his grandfather in New York City with the orphans. So they made the list. They all talked about it. Some of the people organizing the Emergency Rescue Committee were refugees themselves, and so they were afraid of being incarcerated if they went back to Europe. And that was another thing I had in common with Varian, because after a while I hear people talking about this needs to be done, that needs to be done, we've got to do this, well, who's going to? And so I'm usually the one to say, all right, tell me what to do, and off I go. And that's basically what Varian
So
did.
he volunteered.
So he volunteered.
And this committee, interesting, was supported by Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes.
She supported a lot of causes that maybe the official government did not
Right.
subscribe to.
Right.
But she gave her support, in a sense, emotionally, definitely, and by coming to the dinner or getting involved in it.
One of the Leon Feuchtwanger was her favorite author.
Right, he was a very famous German author that people loved back in those days in the 30s. Yes, so then we set the stage. So he goes to Marseille in 1940, and he's there for about 13 months total.
He was supposed to be there for 3 weeks. He was scheduled to be there for 3 weeks, and he stayed for 13 months.
Okay. And so let's set the stage. We're going to show in some slides that we have. We have this slide of the photograph he took when he was in Berlin in 1935 and saw what was happening with the Nazis and the German people. And then we also have a photograph in Marseille at the American Embassy where hundreds, maybe thousands, every day would line up begging to get a passage, a passport, a visa, or something to be able to escape. And he walks into that atmosphere.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so we've established at our program that what he did, he needed the help and relished the help of one of the people at the American Embassy who was the Vice Consul, Hiram Bingham IV, who was there in the embassy, who collaborated with Varian to help write passports that he shouldn't have, given visas that he shouldn't have.
The only American official to help was Hiram Bingham IV.
Right.
No one else. They tried to stall Hiram as much as they tried to distract Varian, yes.
Okay, and we have also a photograph of an American State Department letter from Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, who wrote to Hiram Bingham, the Vice Consul at Marseille, and said, "We're not enabling you to do this. You are not supposed to be doing this. Varian Fry should not. You should not be counseling him to do this kind of work. We are not enemy combatants in this war. Don't do it." And after 13 months, Varian really had to leave. The committee
His
told
passport
him to leave,
expired.
and he had to leave. And Hiram Bingham also wanted more promotions, perhaps, wanted to stay in the Foreign Service. He was transferred to Lisbon and then to South America, and then he figured without promotions and with what had happened previously, he was going to go home to Salem, Connecticut, another Connecticut connection right here in our backyard.
In our backyard.
And we had his son and his family members at our programs honoring him along with Varian Fry.
And the, as we'll talk about Professor Pettigrew, July 17th, we've proposed, or Dr. Pettigrew's proposed that July 17th be honoring a state holiday for Hiram Bingham IV, which is his birthday, and have that become a state holiday.
Right.
We're working on that still.
Yes, and we already have one. One of the reasons for our program in this community was what Professor Pettigrew and his colleagues down at the Southern State University College did to lobby the Connecticut legislature, the governor, to have a day for Varian Fry on his birthday, October 15th. And that was amazing because, again, it brought to all of us the education that many of us were lacking in the fact that we have a hero in our midst, in our history. And, talk about the fact that Varian Fry was the first American to be named a righteous gentle or righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem. And it'll tell about what's that all about.
Well, in the mid-90s, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. had a big exhibit about the Emergency Rescue Committee and what Varian Fry did with his associates. And the director of Yad Vashem happened to go there and didn't know about Varian Fry. And that was when he was inducted into, I don't know if inducted is the right word, but he was honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nation for all, because he was sent with a list of 300 people and 3 weeks to help them leave the country. He stayed for 13 months and saved over 2,000. And Varian estimates that the committee probably interviewed at least 15,000 people. And therefore the directors of Yad Vashem understood this and learned about him and honored him. And his son Jim, who I mentioned before, because Varian had already died, Jim went with the American delegation to plant a tree.
Well, that's what they have, a grove at Yad Vashem.
Yes.
When someone is named. But it's interesting, it wasn't until the 90s that the first American was named. And the righteous among the nations were people who Yad Vashem determined in naming them, you risked your life to save someone from Nazi peril, from the Holocaust.
And Varian had already had some recognition. He received the Dwight Eisenhower Medal for what he did. But that's one of those quiet ones. And there's a wall of remembrance in Illinois with his name. That one is more recent, like the Yad Vashem. But before that, he was honored with the Dwight Eisenhower Medal. And it's a story that comes and goes. You know, people, the general public is always ready for the next story. And so he became old news, I think. And because he wasn't, there wasn't a big media presence about that history.
Right. Well, Professor Pettigrew and his colleagues down at the university in New Haven determined that this was a story that needed to be told more to Connecticut residents, since now he really was born in New Jersey, right?
He was born in New York City, and the family moved to Ridgewood, New Jersey.
But he lived in Connecticut for most of his life after he
went to
returned.
prep school here,
Yeah.
and then moved here as an adult.
Right, so most of his life was as a Connecticut resident, and that's what prompted Professor Pettigrew to teach his students about it, hook up with one of the other professors who taught Holocaust history, and lobbied the Connecticut legislature, and last June, I think it was, Governor Lamont signed into law VARIAN FRY Day every year, October 15th in Connecticut.
And the advantage of that is it's during the school year. Already Dr. Pettigrew teaches about the Holocaust and VARIAN FRY, but being in October gives the opportunity to teach about VARIAN FRY.
Yeah. Okay, we talked about Hiram Bingham. So now the same professor has now even met Hiram Bingham IV's family, his son in Connecticut at the program, and he is now leading an effort which will be probably successful.
Yes.
To have July 17th every year as Hiram Bingham IV. So that story is somewhat like VARIAN FRY's, because even his family did not really become aware of the extent of his contributions for years. It took a while for them to see his papers. His son wrote a book not that long ago, and just within the last 20 years, have people come out and said, wow, he was a hero as well. He is not named as a righteous Gentile, because I read he was a functionary of a government, so they felt that he wasn't putting himself in the same kind of peril, but he really did.
He really did.
He really did sacrifice his career and so much more.
He was hiding refugees.
Yeah, but the great thing about what happened to Hiram Bingham, as well as VARIAN FRY, is whatever the American government felt he was doing wrong by not following their lead and saying you're not allowed to give these visas and do these illegal things, the government has forgiven him. And Colin Powell back in 2000 had a special program for righteous diplomats, and the American government has changed its view of him, and he's now a hero. So,
and his son had the commemorative stamp created for Hiram Bingham.
Right. So we're recognizing both of these people who were not that well known, Connecticut residents who saved thousands of people in the Holocaust. And then people say, well, talk about this. They interviewed people, so some people didn't make it and probably died. And of course, Hiram Bingham's son has said, you know, my father felt terrible. He felt he couldn't save them all.
Right.
And the government was telling me I couldn't even help and I couldn't save them all. That's not satisfying. How did VARIAN FRY feel about that?
He felt he could have done more. There was so much more to do, that as many as he interviewed and did help, he knew that there were more who needed the help. As time passed, the process of getting the paperwork became more complicated. As well, while VARIAN was there, of course, it was complicated getting the transit visas in and out of countries on their way to their ultimate destination. But it also became more complicated into how many of these, more was required of the people trying to leave. And so the complication of how many were how much paperwork was required in terms of transit, and I just lost my train of thought.
Okay. Well, anyway.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, it got more complicated and more difficult.
It got more complicated. And and also the money that the refugees needed. VARIAN gave people cash, even if they couldn't get the paperwork complete. They might not be able to find a birth certificate or something like that. They always left with money because they were so impoverished.
And what was the route? Oftentimes they go over the Pyrenees to Spain.
That's amazing. Yes. A couple named Hans and Lisa Fitko were already helping refugees, and they would have the people dress in farm clothes and take them out into the vineyards in southern, by the mountains in the Pyrenees in southern France. So they looked like vineyard workers and had a trail over the mountains into Spain. This way they avoided having to give the paperwork until they crossed the border into Spain. And then they went on, usually to Lisbon, and then off to wherever their destination was. But Hans and Lisa did that for a long time, and so they, of course, word spread that Varian was there. So they all these people connected with one another. And when they had the map of the Pyrenees, they gave Varian the map, which he had hidden on the mirror in the wall, because of all the inspections by the Gestapo. And it was called the F route, and that for Fitco. And Lisa has written a memoir about it. I'm pretty sure Hans did, but I couldn't get my hands on it, about going over the mountains. And part of the problem was when Leon Feuchtwanger finally made it to the United States, the author, he was just delighted, and he wrote an article about, this is how I got out of France.
Which people didn't want him to disclose.
He gave so much information, they had to make changes. But Hans and Lisa got a lot of people over. If you look also now in general historic fiction, you see their names written. The character in the story had escaped because they went over the mountains with a woman named Lisa. And so that's popping up. I'm seeing that in popular fiction. And so that's the kind of thing. I'm a big reader, and I enjoy historic fiction. So if I would see something like a woman named Lisa took us over the mountains, I'd go right into the research. And that's how much I did with Varian. So that's how they got over the Pyrenees. One of the more emphatic circumstances, when they were getting Franz Werfel and his wife Alma and Heinrich Mann and his nephew Golo, Hannah Arendt. There were about 10 people who were very important on the list. And Marc Chagall was saying, no, I'm not going to go, I'll be fine, I'm famous. And Varian insisted on being the escort to take these people over the Pyrenees. Well, Alma Werfel showed up with 18 suitcases. Of course, they're not going to carry that over the mountains. So Varian's plan was he would take the train and take them on the train and cross the border that way. But the paperwork was not accepted for all of these people. And so Varian took everybody's luggage, including the 18 suitcases, and said, I'll meet you in Spain. And so these people, some of them elder, climbed the mountains to get over, and there's a border post in Spain. They have to show their paperwork. Walter Benjamin was extremely concerned. He was a very anxious man. The committee used to call him Baby because he was so anxious he'd just be incapacitated. And he had written a final manuscript of his work and hadn't published it yet, and he wanted to get it over the mountains and go away with it, but he was terrified. And when they got over the mountain, he was terrified, and they had spent the night there. He was afraid their paperwork would not be accepted, and he killed himself.
Oh.
He had poison with him, and nobody knows what happened to that manuscript.
Oh, wow.
Yes, these people were under,
So
I
much
can't even
pressure.
imagine.
Yeah, the stress.
I can't imagine.
How many miles did they walk?
Oh, over the mountains, I don't know how many miles, but the Pyrenees are quite a hike. Yeah. To get up and over there, and they would stop and because Hans and Lisa knew where
way
to stop.
Stations they had.
Yes, yes. And also people in the village. Banyol is the village there at the base of the Pyrenees, and some of the people knew what was happening, and they would help when they could. Walter Meyerhoff, I think his parents were with that group. So many names, I get some of them mixed up, but Otto Meyerhoff was the youngest recipient of the Nobel Prize, and he was Jewish, so Hitler didn't want him there, and his wife Hedwig and Walter were going to escape. Walter didn't have all the paperwork, and so he helped escort people over the mountain, knew the trail, the people who did that, because it wasn't just Lisa and Hans doing it. More than 2 people helped others escape over the mountains. So when Walter's paperwork was not accepted, he helped lead people over the F route. And word had spread by the time Walter was waiting for his paperwork. Word had spread that this was going on, and maybe there were people here in the village helping the Jews escape. And Walter was under observation. But he knew one of the judges in the town who was sympathetic. And he saw a person he recognized. He wrote a note on a napkin and dropped it on the ground. And this man picked it up and took it to the judge. And Walter was freed.
Wow.
Yes.
So many stories.
Oh,
right?
so many stories. And so many stories in this one particular committee, in one particular area, and we know how many heroes are out there.
Exactly, exactly. Let's turn to the slides that we have, so go through them to illustrate some of the things that Marion has been talking about, okay? So this is a picture. He must be, what, 50 there?
Oh, no, this is around 32, 33.
Oh, really?
This is around the time he was in
this is around
France.
the time he was in Europe?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, he looks more mature. All right, let's move on. And there you
Oh,
are,
look, it's
Marion. Me. Okay, that's you. Next, keep going. All right, is that, at what age is he there?
I would say 30s.
So he's in his 30s. So he was in the 30s, in the 30s.
Yes.
When he was
he was born in
France.
1907.
Okay, go ahead, keep going. That's a caricature. So when someone does a caricature of you like that in a magazine, that means you're pretty famous, right?
Somebody's making it.
Is that Perlman? Who did that?
It looks like Hirschfeld.
Oh,
to
Hirschfeld.
Me, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah, that was done. Next. That's the important photograph that Marion took, right?
Yes. Yes, this is when he arrived, or at the time he went to Berlin. Obviously, it's not the night that the pogrom was occurring, but he was a hobbyist photographer. But here are the people with the soldiers are marching by and saluting to the soldiers, and occupied. There was so much space occupied, and you could see the citizens also saluting.
Wow, that's quite a photograph. 1935.
And you could see in the back, you see the flagpoles, and you see cameras in the background. There's a tripod over here somewhere where other people are seeing it.
Okay, next. Again, this was an article in the New York Times,
1941.
Yeah. No, what year? 1941. 1941, it says. Copyright 1941, New York Post, sorry. Refugee visas hard to get at Marseille. So this was exactly the time when VARIAN FRY was there, and when Hiram Bingham was at the embassy. 1941, New York Post. Go on. Next. And this is the scene that we mentioned earlier, right?
And it's unimaginable. They waited for hours and sometimes were turned away. And imagine the people who are trying to process this too.
Yeah.
One story after another, one person after another, trying to get the release papers, basically, the visas, the passports.
Right. So this is right in front of the American embassy in Marseille, France, where so many had congregated, where they thought that would be the, quote, safest port to leave.
The only port that was open.
The only port that was open at that time. Okay, next. And here's a photograph in his later years of Hiram Bingham. Very illustrious family. The first, second, third were all very famous in their own right in all kinds of
important
feats.
part of Connecticut history.
Yes. So this is the one who was the vice consul. Go on. And that shows that he was the vice consul in Marseille. That's what he looked like in those years. Next. And that's just a photograph, I think, of his staff, the United States consulate staff in Marseille in 1941. A lot of people.
And imagine all those people and only one is willing to help.
Only one is willing to help. Wow. Yeah. Next. This is a very important photograph that was in, I think, the New York Times. And talk about that, because there's famous people in this photograph.
Yes, Marc Chagall, you could see him to the right of the painting. He would not leave because he felt that he was so well known and such a talented artist. And eventually he was arrested in a roundup, and so his wife called Varian Fry and said, "They've arrested my husband." And it was because of the sense of, first of all, Varian loved these classic artists and writers, but also he knew the importance of the big picture of art, or the world of art, and to have the most famous artist in the world ready to be sent to a concentration camp was just unthinkable. So Varian did what Varian did, and he called the police and he said, "I cannot believe you've got Marc Chagall. He's the most famous artist in the world. Germany is going to look so foolish when the public finds out that you've arrested this amazing talent." And they released him half an hour later.
Wow. And also Hiram Bingham is in this photograph.
Yes, he's in the back,
in the background,
the tall person
right?
in the back.
Chagall's wife and Varian Fry.
Varian on the left.
So eventually, obviously, the Chagalls did accede to a plan to leave and was successful in getting
And we're
out.
so lucky to have so much of Chagall's work in the area, in New York and in Westchester and in the various tri-state area. His stained glass windows and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, that's one example of Varian Fry, and together with Hiram Bingham, they let people sleep in their villas, in their homes, and did all kinds of things to hide them and get them ready.
Hiding places.
Yeah.
Yes, there was in Marseille there was a store, I think it was, it had a false wall in the back that about 8 people could hide behind.
Wow. Okay, next photograph. All right, this one is, it shows some of the people Varian Fry with Max Ernst, Jacqueline Breton, Andre Masson. Poet and artist Andre Breton visit Varian Fry in his office, works with his work staff, so that's a nice composite of what he was doing in 1938, right?
This is 4041.
I mean 4041.
The middle picture is at the Villa Herbel, where Max Ernst, the Bretons, that's Jacques Lipschitz in the background, in between Max Ernst and Andre.
Right.
They all lived at the Villa Herbel, which was outside of Marseille, and I believe the right is also, it looks like they're having dinner there, and there's Danny Benedite on the left, Varian, Miriam Davenport, Jean Gamal, and that might be Mary Jane, the staff. The food was rationed, and so even though they're living in this gorgeous villa, they're literally eating the fish out of the goldfish pond.
Wow.
They had a cow hidden on the property until local people found it.
Yeah.
And so dinner, but they did have a large wine collection of wine.
Right.
So that, I think, is also, you see the curtains in the background. I think that's also at the Villa Herbel.
Yeah, I think we have it. Next slide. I think we have a photograph of the villa or something. Well,
Oh,
that's
there's
that
the
same
same
photograph of those people. Max
See the
Ernst.
wallpaper? It's on. They've got the map on the wall.
That was in the villa. Okay, next slide. That shows Marseille. There was a raid at a cafe that was the intellectuals' hangout. Hiram Bingham took that photograph, interestingly enough, and on the right they have the artist Wilfred Lamb in Marseille in 1940. So it was a hotbed of activity.
The cafes were very popular places, gathering places. Wilfredo Lamb is on the right-hand picture. He's the tall person in the left, in the back.
Okay, next slide.
My friend.
Now, that's a young man who helped Varian Fry. Who is that?
Miriam Davenport was an American staff member. She was studying in France, and she knew Eustace Rosenberg. He was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, a really energetic and very active young man. He could pass as Aryan, and so he delivered the paperwork to the refugees who were hiding.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, go on.
So he went on to, there he is. He eventually came, after working, he went, when Varian left, Eustace joined the resistance, and then he helped the Allied forces when they came in, when the Americans came over. And he came here and he taught at the New School in New York, where a few of the The other, Hannah Arendt, I know, also taught at the New School in New York. And then he became a professor at Bard College in Rhinebeck, or Poughkeepsie. And I met him. He was the last surviving member of the Emergency Rescue Committee.
Oh, okay.
Of course, he was the youngest. He was 19, 20 years old when he was doing this.
Yeah.
And he is the only person I have ever met who had wonderful stories about the Holocaust. And you think that's a kind of a contradiction in terms. But he was rescuing people. He was saving people.
He has good stories.
He has good stories. He was captured and he pretended to have appendicitis. He was going to be sent to Auschwitz. And he pretended to have appendicitis. So they put him in the camp hospital and removed his appendix. But he knew somebody who was in passing and saw him out the window, and this person got him a change of clothes and a bicycle. Eustace climbed out the window and rode the bicycle to freedom to join, because he was with the resistance.
What a story.
He had so many, and there are many interviews by him, or of him, on the internet, on YouTube and such.
Wow.
But we became good friends, and hello, Karen. His wife, Karen, Eustace died a couple of years ago, just before his 100th birthday.
Wow.
He was working on his second book, and Karen was always by his side. She's lovely. I still go up to Rhinebeck and visit them. They have a beautiful home overlooking the Catskills. And it was just lovely to get to know him. And he wasn't that enthusiastic about it. And what I did was...
he wasn't enthusiastic about what?
About talking about VARIAN FRY.
Oh.
And, but I reread Mary Jane Gould's book, Crossroads, Marseille, 1940, where he's mentioned frequently. And so when I met him, I had a sort of a script. And so we had great conversations. Of course, we talked about every other thing. He was a literature professor, became professor emeritus, honored with the French Medal of Valor. And I walked into their house the first time, and there was a copy of War and Peace on the table, and I've read it at least 3 times. So we were meant to be friends, and he was just really a fascinating person, very involved at the college, and his wife is just delightful.
Okay, and she's still here?
She's still here. She's still, they were married late in life, and she is still volunteering in the Rhinebeck area, and she goes back to see family in Germany. A lovely person.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. So that's great. And there were 2 women, Miriam Davenport and Mary Jane Gould. This is one of them. Now the next slide. That was Mary Jane Gould. What role did those 2 women play during that period of time?
They were both American. Mary Jane was an heiress. Her father invented the heating system for Pullman cars.
Wow.
And so she was living with a family. She was boarding with a family in France, just partying, studying, traveling.
Well, she wasn't Jewish, right?
No.
Right.
No. But she was a wealthy socialite. And when the war broke out, she gave her plane to the French for their Air Force. And she was not going to leave. She just loved being there. I'm guessing she loved the excitement. And Mary Jane, her book, Crossroads, Marseille,
next slide.
1940.
I think that shows the book. Next slide. Oh, that's the 2 of them. And
they stayed in touch. Yeah. Yes, that's Mary Jane on the left. And Miriam, she was a student in France, and she was engaged to a gentleman from Yugoslavia. And so she left the committee to join him and get married. But
they were both active in the committee and helping.
Mary Jane interviewed people, also gave a lot of money, and would deliver some of the more difficult visas, where it was more there was more contrivance to getting them there. And Miriam interviewed many of the refugees. At first, they were looking for people with artistic ability because they went with a list of artists, and that just became part of all of the interviewing because there were so many people in need, and VARIAN wasn't going to say no. So Mary Jane also interviewed them, And when Varian began to suffer from ulcers from the stress, these two said, we're getting you out of the office. The office was Varian's hotel room. And so they found this villa outside of Marseille and rented this villa. There was room for many, many people. And so the artists lived out there, and they just said to Varian, you're coming with us. You've got to get away from here. And so that is a whole other sub-story in the whole story. The activities there, the rationing of the food, taking time off, Gestapo inspections. So they're the ones who found this old villa.
And did they pay for it?
They rented it, yes. They rented it.
Next slide.
This is Miriam Davenport's memoir. It's about 30 pages, 2 sides of the page. It wasn't published as a book. But I can't even remember where I found it, but everyone on the committee, the original committee, wrote about it. Lisa and Hans did. Eustace wrote about it. Varian, of course, wrote Surrender on Demand. And so this is Miriam's
All right, next
memoir.
Oh, I wish I had a next slide.
There's Mary Jane's.
Okay, and you said you really enjoyed that book.
It is like reading a spy novel. It's out of print, unfortunately, maybe with the growing popularity of Harry and Varian, it could be republished, but her boyfriend was a gangster, and his name was Killer. So they joked about that, and but he also was instrumental in helping exchange currency.
Wow.
So yes, and he lived at the villa with the artists also, and Varian was not happy about them. Nobody trusted her boyfriend.
Oh. But that's an interesting book.
It's very interesting.
And I should have had a photograph of the book that Marion Fry wrote, which was called
Surrender on Demand.
And what did that mean, Surrender on Demand?
When the armistice agreement, when Germany took over France, the armistice agreement, Article 19 said that anyone who could not prove citizenship must be surrendered on demand to the authorities. Okay. And of course, the Jewish citizenship had been taken away.
Right.
And anybody on Hitler's list that was anti-Nazi, communist, whatever, they must be surrendered on demand.
And so the American government said, you're living in a country that we do not have a war footing with. You've got to follow their rules, basically.
Right. And that really made increased the urgency.
Yeah.
Because that really targeted them more. It was more targeting of people who had already been targeted.
Yeah. Okay, next slide.
That's Lisa's book about going through the mountains. That's Lisa
Escape through the Pyrenees.
Yeah, that's Lisa on the left.
You
and
talked
her
about
husband,
that
Hans.
couple that helped.
Yep.
Next slide. And this was we're not going to read every word, but that was the letter from the State Department to Hiram Bingham saying, stop Varian Fry from doing what he's doing, and you can't do it either. We might sympathize with the goals, but we are not allowed to do this as a government.
And he says you should inform Dr. Bond and Mr. Fry. Dr. Bond was with the YMCA. So that was another organization helping, sometimes just feeding.
Right. So
people.
Any organizations that are violating that surrender on demand, that agreement that France has with Germany, we can't interfere with that, and you should not be doing these illegal things.
Right.
But thankfully, Bingham and Fry did not obey.
They found ways to do it legally.
Right.
With all the paperwork that they had to gather, and the paperwork had each item of the paperwork had a different date, and so your visa might not have the same. Your transit visa in France might not have the same expiration as the one to Spain, which expired before you could get to Portugal. So that was very complicated.
Right. And so we have to acknowledge that in the State Department and amongst a lot of the American people, anti-Semitism was a strong force during those years.
Right. And Eleanor Roosevelt was so insistent. And I'm sure that Franklin agreed, but he was juggling the politics of it, staying neutral. How could he help arm England, well, which we did through the New Deal, not the New Deal.
Lend-Lease.
Lend-Lease.
Yeah.
Yeah, and selling through another country so that we could aid them, but nothing openly
Right.
confronting.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. And this is the book Courageous Dissent, which Hiram Bingham's son, Robert Kim Bingham, wrote about him. And that's a picture of Hiram Bingham overlooking the Marseille harbor. Next. And this is again a memorial to Hiram Bingham in Salem, Connecticut, showing what a hero he was during the Holocaust years. Next slide. Okay.
Oh, I love that.
This is Varian Fry. It's a little older.
It's probably in the, I'd say, late 50s, early 60s. He loved bird watching, and he would go up to a friend in Armenia, New York, had a farm. And I mentioned Danny Benedict, who was on the staff. Danny's sister married an American, and they had a farm in Armenia, which is not too far from here. And Varian would go up and bird watching with him. And his son is an alumni of the same school I went to. So when I gave a talk on Varian at my 40th prep school reunion, this gentleman came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Danny's nephew."
Wow.
Yeah, it's a very small world,
It's
and
a
they're
small
just
world.
yeah. So he liked to
Nice.
go up there and go watch,
Right.
go out bird watching in the
Okay.
fields.
Next slide. Now these are a series of slides. That's Marc Chagall signing something for Varian
A
Fry.
sketch for Varian, yes, that hung in their home.
All right. Next slide. You'll get to see the whole.
There's
That's
the
the
sketch.
painting.
Yeah.
And that hung in the Fry home.
Uh huh.
Next slide.
And I never did translate
Yeah,
that.
and what does that say?
I never did translate that. I think it's a souvenir, or it's with regards, remembrance.
Remembrances,
Mr.
right.
Clark, my French
From-
teacher, would be ashamed of
From
me.
Marc Chagall to Varian
To
Fry
Varian in
in
1964.
1964. Okay, next slide. And that's him.
That's the French Medal of Honor. In 1965, he went to France
Okay.
with his family.
Okay, next slide.
This
And
is one of the
there's-
streets in Berlin.
So they recognized him in Germany
Afterwards, yes.
right now. as
Hans Saal, the poet Hans Saal, became friends, and he was instrumental in some of the recognition on the streets. There's a bus stop with the history of Varian and the Emergency Rescue Committee and also one of the neighborhoods. Hans Saal was friends with the president of Mercedes.
Oh.
And he initiated getting the neighborhoods cleaned up by Mercedes, and also the some of the street signs in
Nice.
Varian's honor.
And next slide. And again,
That's
this
my
is,
saying.
where is that?
That's probably near the hotels, and it looks like they've got a
In Marseille.
yes. And it looks like they have streets of recognizing the American heroes.
And on the bottom it says American citizen hero of the resistance. Varian Fry. That's wonderful. Have you been there?
No, but there's more recognition. As I said, the friend of mine's son who wrote and told me he learned about Varian in history in school in Denmark. They know more about him in Europe than we do here.
Wow. Well, maybe we're changing that
I
now,
hope so.
right? Next slide. That's
Is that for Yad Vashem? The
Yad
certificate?
Vashem, yeah. That was a certificate of honor at Yad Vashem.
And it's whoever saves one life is as though he saved the entire world.
Right, right,
One person can make a difference.
right. Next, is that the last slide? And no, this is the last slide. This is the program that you and I went to on October
last year,
15th of 2025 at the Southern University, where we celebrated the very first Varian Fry Day in Connecticut.
Yes.
And that was October 15, 2025. And it was a wonderful program. That's where we met you and determined that, we have to follow up and do a program about this and learn more about Varian Fry. And hopefully we'll have a Hiram Bingham the Fourth Day next year.
I'm thinking that's going well. I think it's, I wrote one of the letters of recommendation back. This is May, or
Yeah, I did too.
about
We
four-
wrote
Did you good?
yeah,
Good.
legislative testimony via
Testimony,
letters
yes,
and
yes.
things. Yes, Professor Pettigrew testified, so we're looking forward to that. So now let's hope that with programs like ours, with what we did in April for the Holocaust Commemoration Program, that people will understand the heroism of people like Varian Fry and Hiram Bingham. So to kind of summarize, what did you find was the most surprising thing? What did you learn that was either shocked you the most or that was the most surprising, unusual thing that you learned?
I wasn't surprised, but I was really very happy with the reception I got from every single person I contacted or met with while I was doing this research. Everyone I've spoken with, without exception, was very generous, very enthusiastic with their information, telling me their family stories, telling me things like Danny Benedict's nephew visiting Varian's office in New York City in the Chrysler Building as a young boy, and everybody was open, available, and ready to share. It's just wonderful, and friendships that I've developed. Amy Ernst and I stay in touch. Her grandfather was Max Ernst, and she was not able to come to the program because she was at the Ernst retreat in Sedona, and but she's always been very active and supportive, and it was without exception, everybody made themselves available to me if I took pictures or wrote quotes or anything like that. Always enthusiastic about it. But one thing that I'm a little disappointed in, there has been a movie and a TV series written about Varian Fry. I'm glad for any recognition. I wonder why there hasn't been anything besides the 20-minute documentary, Assignment Rescue. The movie and the miniseries are very fictitious. And okay, that's historic fiction, but there is so much to the story that it doesn't need to be fictionalized. There are so many stories, just as I said, Bell at the villa, or hiding from people, or when they were all of the Americans and anybody helping the refugees were all suddenly rounded up and put on a ship for 3 days in the hold with hardly any food because Marshal Pétain was coming to town. So there's just so many interesting stories, and it would be wonderful to see more. I do know that Pierre Sauvage is another scholar of the Emergency Rescue Committee, and he has the movie rights to Crossroads 19.
He might be
Marseille,
making a documentary, or
I hope he is. He's
yeah.
done documentaries and he's done interviews with other people, but I'd like to see more of that media attention, because people look at these things and understand them. I mean, look at people are still watching Schindler's List, A Beautiful Life, those movies that are real stories. And those of us who know the background, I think that I represent us in wanting.
So I guess there's a certain sadness that both Hiram Bingham and Fry did not know the extent of the pride and the celebration of their lives and what they had done during their lifetimes.
Yes.
We saw the French acknowledge him, but we didn't see the Americans acknowledge him. Bingham's recognition came years after he died.
Yep.
And when the American government said, okay, we're sorry that we considered you not doing your duty in Marseille, but now, you were a hero. You disobeyed, but you were a hero. Yes. And just to finalize, how did Fry die? Toward the end, he wasn't famous. He didn't have a happy existence. We seem to
and we see that in a lot of these heroes. In fact, you remind me of something that I wanted to read from Mary Jane Gold that I think explains these heroes who come back and there's no they don't get that recognition. Varian went on to of course, I didn't put it on the top of my, here it is. Varian, he and Eileen divorced, and she developed cancer. They remained friends, and he read to her every day until she died. He met Annette Riley, and they were married and had 3 children, and they separated. They were working on reconciliation. She moved from Ridgefield to New York with the kids. Varian would visit on weekends, and then he was teaching in Reading, and he actually taught at a few of the local schools in Ridgefield, history, Latin, classics, and he didn't show up for work one day, and so the school called Annette, and Annette called the police, who found him in bed surrounded with his papers. He had died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1967. And the papers that were around him were, he was working on a high school version of Surrender on Demand that he called Assignment Rescue. And the police saw this and they thought he was working on a book of fiction. It was so...
They didn't realize that this was a true story. They didn't realize
how true, but also I still think people didn't recognize the extent. This was in the 60s, so people didn't have the information we have available to us today. So he died, and he's buried in the Greenwood Cemetery in New York. And just a few years ago, Annette died, and the family invited me to her funeral, so I enjoyed meeting, well, I had met his son, but I met his daughter-in-law and his grandson. And I actually, in all of the research and things that I had done, Annette wrote a textbook about the orphan trains, and I found it. So I gave that to his grandson, that here was something of your grandmother's. So it was a sad ending. He died in relative obscurity, but we find that with these heroes, that they come home. Schindler went bankrupt several times after the war, and these people just, when Harry Bingham left the State Service, he was an inventor and working always on something creative, but didn't really succeed at it. And so what Mary Jane says...
Yeah, why don't you read that as
this
our
is
close?
Perfect.
Yes.
And you know how I love Mary Jane. She says, legendary figures pass before our eyes, monolithic figures onto which we project our dreams. Heroes of flesh and blood are complex creatures, born sometimes to shine brilliantly only for their short and finest hour. Varian Fry went to Marseille to his appointed task and fulfilled his mission, not less glorious because it was brief.
Beautiful.
It gives me goosebumps.
It's well said.
Isn't that
well said,
wonderful?
And a nice way to end this.
I thank you so much.
That we need to spend more time with these heroes, and it is true. There's a certain aura around one particular part of your life, and that sums everything up.
That sums everything up. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Marion.
Oh, thank you.
For bringing us education on Varian Fry, and together with Hiram Bingham. And we should be proud they were Connecticut residents.
That they are American heroes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Marion. We'll see you all next time on Talk Back. Bye.